Hi guys, so welcome to the channel if you're new here, welcome back if you're returning viewer or subscriber. Today's video is a bit of a crazy concept. We're going to do something a little bit out there, a little bit rogue, and that is film my November wrap up. I filmed a wrap up for every single month throughout this year so far, so you absolutely bet I'm not going to be missing one. But every single obstacle has been thrown in my way within the past couple of weeks, which means this is the latest I think I've ever posted a wrap up, bearing in mind I've posted many wrap-ups on this channel. And I also had a really successful in terms of quantity reading month and also kind quality. I feel like it's more useful for you to hear me talk about lots of books, then you're getting tons of recs and then you might find something that you specifically might like. Yeah, so basically I had a really busy week. I did this community post being like, okay, I'm gonna go back to it, don't worry about it. I'm gonna post 2 videos this week, which I'm still gonna do. But I was then smacked in the face with the plague. And by the plague, I mean the common cold. It's been awful. I haven't been sick since July, and I'm really feeling the effects of what getting sick is like because my body's just not used to it, and just all in all a terrible time. I'm recovered enough that I feel like my voice is not going to be too annoying to sit down and film this video for you, but if it does start to get a little bit off, I will chug some water and return. But hopefully we can get through this entire thing in one go because, like I said, I've got so many good books to share with you and a lot of range in my reading. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So the very first book that I read in November, or finished in November, was Just Kids by Patti Smith. I'm not going to talk about this one too much because A, I'm sick, so I'm going to try and tone it down a bit, but mostly B, because I have a reading vlog on this book. I went to New York in October and I read this book while I was over there and then finished it once I got back. So if you want to hear full thoughts on this in much more depth than I'm going to give now, check out that video. I'll have it linked in the cards and down below. Just Kids is a memoir by Patti Smith, who is a poet and musician. She is very well renowned within her field, but she also somehow managed to win the National Book Award from her very first novel, which is just insane to me. It's kind of like a coming of age memoir kind of book following her move to New York City when she was a teenager and then her subsequent relationship with photographer Robert Mapplethorpe. I was so excited about this, first of all because I love music memoirs and that's what I thought I was going to be getting from this. The other thing is that I actually studied Robert Mapplethorpe in photography, so I was really excited to delve into them personally. It was a lot more focused on their relationship than it was on their careers, I feel. Or maybe at the beginning it was them starting from nothing, and then towards the end we got a little taste of Patti's music career, but majority of this book was just documenting their relationship with a particular lens from Patti's eyes, obviously, of Robert. So a lot of this is her supporting him in his work, them struggling in New York City. This was a really humbling book to be reading because while I was in New York, I was going out all the time. We went to some really lovely restaurants and things like that and did a lot of fun things. And that really contrasted with how difficult Patti's life was in New York. When she first moved there, she actually arrived at a friend's place trying to stay there, and it turned out the friend had moved away. So she spent her first night in New York on the streets. Quite a difficult read in parts actually, and I really appreciated how honest it is. So it's very much like a rags to riches tale about 2 artists doing whatever they can to try and get by while also prioritizing their art over pretty much everything else in their lives. So this was a 3.5 star read. I don't think the writing was that incredible. I had a couple of one-liners that I enjoyed, but mostly it's because I was expecting music memoir and that's not what this is at all. And I feel like this is mismarketed and stuff like that. But it's still a nice little glimpse into that era, the era of the 70s and the kind of art scene of New York in the 70s, which was such a cool thing to dip my toe into because this is truly a first-hand account of that life. The other thing is I was reading Eve Babbitt's, I think it's I Used to Be Charming. It's an essay collection of hers, and there was a lot of overlap between that book and this one because Eve's documentation is of LA in the 60s and 70s and this was New York in the 60s and 70s. So I really enjoyed the little name dropping that I got through both books. That is a common criticism of this one though, is the name dropping, because a lot of this is Patti just being I saw this person and then I saw this person and then I hung out with this person and then this person spoke to me about this. And if you don't know who these people are, if you're not already familiar with them, then that can be just a little bit tedious or something like that. But yeah, overall 3.5 stars, a really good read. Just not everything I wished it would be, and definitely not a favourite book of all time. Next up in November, I read The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. This is a little poem. I read my first Poe in October, that was The Black Cat, and I really enjoyed that. The Raven is a poem, and I feel like it was a bit, I don't know, I definitely found the worth in it through researching it afterwards and understanding the context and what Poe was trying to say through the tale. So as a poem itself, I thought it sounded pretty and whatever, but it didn't really impact me. I think that's what I'm trying to say. I did, however, really love the picture it painted for me. I feel like the vibes were really evocative and atmospheric. I had a bit of an image in my mind about what everything looked like. I feel like that obviously comes from the skill of the poet. I did like this. I didn't think it was like incredible, but I feel like if you read this, it's definitely worth reading all the contextual information surrounding this poem, because there's so much metaphorically that's found within the poem that you can't necessarily exactly like tap into if you are reading it just like start to finish and not really like considering every single word or phrase. That was unrated. I don't know, it's hard to rate poetry anyway, and I just feel like when you're rating one like singular poem, that's perhaps even harder than rating a collection, so I decided to leave it be. Book number 3 is Fawkes by Nadine. This is one of my favourite books of all time. So this was actually a reread. I read it in 2018, I think, originally, and absolutely loved it so much. It was a 4.5 star read. And then I reread it physically the year after, so 2019, and I tabbed up a storm. So many tabs. I feel like this is my most tabbed book. The most tabs within such a short amount of pages. Yeah, this was my third read, but my first reread and my first read of it via the audiobook, and I read it through Spotify's like audiobook service. Fawkes is a historical fantasy book following Guy Fawkes' son. There's no like historical evidence that he had a son, but this is just like a reimagining of the story of Guy Fawkes. If you're unfamiliar with it, it's like the gunpowder plot. It's what we celebrate for Bonfire Night here in the UK, about this man, along with many other men, decided to attempt to blow up Parliament with the intention of killing the king, and that was because we had a Protestant king, but these guys were Catholics. And back in the 1600s, like the king had a lot of power, and so their influence over the country was pretty radical. So if you didn't agree with it, then there was not much you could do other than wait for the next king or queen. I love the tale of the gunpowder plot. I know so much about it because I read this book first off because it was kind of big on Bookstagram, I feel like in 2018. From there, I delved into so much research. I was so fascinated with this story, with the actual like historical events of it. So having this book like introduced me to this, particularly in a YA way, when YA was like my main category of books I was reading. I just adored every single second of this. Now, in terms of the audiobook, I didn't love the narrator. I thought that he made the story feel a little bit cringe, and I particularly didn't enjoy the little voice he put on for the female characters, or character. There's like one main female character. He tried to put on this like little girl voice, and it was just like really not it. I also overall had a feeling that this book was cringe, and I don't know whether that's solely because of the audiobook or whether it's because this is a young adult book and I'm just not, you know, I don't read a lot of YA anymore. This book feels very young. It still has some beautiful quotes. It still made me tear up towards the end. I've cried on every single read I've done of this book. It's such a beautiful tale, and it definitely has much deeper themes running throughout it, aside from like, you know, the historical context. There's a lot that the author adds into the story, particularly like emphasis on like spiritual meaning and connection that is really strong throughout the story, and I feel like that was a really clever like addition to this. I just feel like those things were a little bit heavy-handed on this third read, and I don't know whether that is again like because I was disconnected with the audiobook, or whether I was disconnected with the fact it was a young adult book, or whether this book is actually not as good as I remembered it to be. So yeah, my rating dropped down from a 4.5 to a 4 star. Still like engaging. I still wanted to pick up the audiobook and things like that, but I feel like, I don't know, if I ever reread this again, it will be in many years, I'll read it physically. I'd still recommend this though if you're of YA reading age, because I think it is a really fun book and really interesting if you have any sort of knowledge about the gunpowder plot. Next up, I finally got to Jimi Hendrix Purple Haze by Mellow Brown, DJ Ben Hameen and Tom Mandrake. This is a graphic novel, like comic book style book. I really love like kind of switching up the format of my reading. I feel like this is so refreshing, especially if you are just wanting something kind of quick but also engaging. This is very kindly gifted to me by Titan Comics. They asked if I would like to receive a copy just to like, you know, read and share on my channel if I so wished, and I said yes because I thought the concept sounded so cool. So this is basically the story of Jimi Hendrix, but set in this kind of like, it's this kind of space opera, so it's a sci-fi. We're following him as he travels throughout the galaxies, basically brings rock and roll music to various people he meets. It has this really funny ending where things kind of like get wrapped up, and like it's through the power of like love and healing and music that these enemies are defeated and stuff like that. So you do have to kind of like keep your mind open while you're reading it, but I think it is a really fun, enjoyable read, and also super duper beautifully illustrated. I actually thought I would read you my review because I feel like I kind of wrote down what I wanted to say. This was on Goodreads. I can have it linked down below if anyone's interested in having a look at it. This was so much fun. The plot is really interesting and the characters are great. I kind of wish it had been longer. Aside from that, I think the book would appeal equally to both music lovers and comic book lovers. There were some really heartfelt moments. At times it became a great think piece. Additionally, I really like the art style. The colours are just beautiful and so vivid. I particularly loved how we get a lot of detail after the story's over, where we see initial sketches and can gain a sense of how the artist built the story to match its script. Yeah, so at the back of this book we have these kind of like black and white sketches. So this one's going through the ships and vehicles, this one's creature design, then we have the original cover in full and some pencil sketches, and these are so incredibly detailed and such a cool thing to, you know, get behind the scenes after having appreciated the art all the way through. This kind of made me appreciate it further, but also wrap my head a little bit around the amount of effort that went into creating this little book. Points docked off for the slight ridiculousness of a guitar solo saving an entire population of people, but it's all in the name of fun, and I believe there was enough depth to this for a reader to simply sit back, relax, and enjoy the legend that was Jimi Hendrix brought back to life. Really, really wonderful story. Thank you so much to Titan Comics for sending it my way. We finished off a book. Actually, you know what? This was just a November read, but I did start it initially in August, and then I read like 3 chapters and then put it down for reasons I'm not going to get into. But Lucy and I decided to buddy read it, and that is Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. So this is the second book in the Empyrean series, fourth book. First book being Fourth Wing. I love Fourth Wing. Fourth Wing was a 5-star read for me not last summer, but summer before, like summer 2023. And I was so excited for this release. I got given it for Christmas, I think it was, last year, and then I didn't pick it up. And I didn't pick it up because the reviews came flowing through and they were all negative. I literally heard like 2 people say how much they enjoyed this book. Everyone else was saying how boring it was, how much of like kind of filler book it was, how frustrating it was, everything like that. And I just dreaded picking it up basically. I surprisingly had a pretty good time reading this. Fourth Wing follows Violet Sorrengail, and she attends this war college, which is basically what every single like teenager in her land goes to. And at the school you can basically fall into separate sections depending on what you want to be doing. So you can be a healer, you can be a scribe, you can be a writer. Violet is a scribe. She is someone who works within the library. She's got a real like thirst for knowledge. She's very brave and claw-coded, and she is obsessed with words and stories and documenting history and facts and things like that. However, her mother is the general of the war college, and her mother is like, no child of mine is going to be a scribe, you have to be a writer. And she tells her daughter this very inconveniently, pretty much on the day that, you know, they're doing the trials to become these things. So while she's like all studied up and she would be thriving in her scribe classes, she has to go through this process to become a dragon rider, which is an extremely dangerous thing to do, not only because of the dragons, but because of like the trials they put you through in order to even qualify to bond with a dragon. We get to the end of Fourth Wing, there's a massive plot twist, and things are revealed about the world that we didn't first know. I had so much fun reading that. I will have a vlog where I did, link to the cards down below, because that's like a really in-depth reading vlog. Spoiler free, and then spoilers towards the end, clearly marked. Iron Flame picks up exactly from where we left Fourth Wing, and it is frustrating in a way, because a lot of this book is to do with the relationship that Violet has with this guy called Xaden, who everyone is obsessed with. But also Xaden does something at the end of Fourth Wing. We find out something about Xaden that means that Violet doesn't trust him. So a lot of this book is Violet being unable to ignore her feelings for Xaden, but also being unable to trust Xaden fully because of what he did or what was going on with him throughout Fourth Wing. I think this book wasn't as frustrating as people say, because yes, their conversations were really roundabout. There was so much that wasn't cleared up, but at the same time, I truly can like sympathize and almost even like empathize with Violet in this situation, because if you've lost that trust with someone, then you do need to be able to build it up, and if they're still not being honest with you about things, then you're not going to be coming to any like conclusions and like moving forward with the relationship. You're going to be going around those circles. So I think it's actually on Xaden that this doesn't work out, and I don't think he's being frustrating. I understand his reasons for doing what he did, but I also think that Violet has so much reason to be questioning him, and the ways that he supports her and the ways that he tries to prove himself to her is really, really beautifully done. It shows how much he cares about her through how much patience he had with her, and also how much he was trying to prove himself to be still someone that she would want in her life. I didn't really think about this while I was reading Fourth Wing, but these books are so incredibly dialogue heavy, so if you prefer a more descriptive fantasy, you might not enjoy this series so much. Literally every single page you flip to it and it's just like reams and reams of dialogue with like a couple of sentences in between telling us what's going on outside of the dialogue. When you're reading tons of dialogue, you're naturally going to be going over the same kind of things, because it's not just like plot progression, it's also character dynamics and things like that. The one thing that really did annoy me about this book is that there's so many name drops of locations in this world, and we're actually given 2 maps at the beginning of this. We've got one of the War College, and then we've got one of the land, and every single time a location was name dropped, I'd flick back to the map and I'd scan it through like 5 times and never be able to find it on the map. I'm just like, if you're gonna give us a map, write the locations on it, you know? Like why would you bother telling us the location if you're not going to put it in the map? Because there's a lot of traveling done in this book, and it made that part really confusing to me because I couldn't wrap my head around where these places were because we were not given any context, because it was not written in the text, and then it was not in the map either. I really didn't like the ending of this. That was like a major letdown of this story. I struggled with it because there's basically another twist. I've heard someone say, was it Jack Edwards? I think it might have been. He said that this book follows the exact same arc that Fourth Wing did. And I totally agree. I don't know, I think it was necessary, but I also think that it probably didn't need to be like 600 pages or over 600 pages, particularly when we were going to end off on the same point basically started this book with. Even if this thing is like a different thing, it's pretty much the same kind of concept as the end of Fourth Wing. Also, there are some really cringe lines, but I literally cannot argue with the fact that these books suck me in. I really don't know what Rebecca Yarros puts in her writing. I'm just like obsessed with it. I read like the first page of it and I was like, yep, this is everything to me, and I feel exactly the same way I felt when I read Fourth Wing. She just writes really well, but simultaneously there are like one or two short sentences that I'm just like, yikes, that was so embarrassing. So my experience with this book was like, this is kind of long. I have these real actual issues with the story and the way it's written and delivered and things like that. But then I'm crying over the creatures mentioned in this book, and I'm also feeling Violet's pain, so invested in these relationships, these character dynamics, and the lore of the world and the political intrigue and all of that. This is where I find it difficult to rate because I care about these characters in a 5-star way, but this book is not a 5-star. I have the level of investment that I would have in my favourite fantasy series, but there are issues that I can't ignore with it. So overall I gave Iron Flame 4 stars. I can't ignore the issues, but I also can't ignore how much I just like love reading these books basically. So I'm really excited for Onyx Storm. I'm slightly worried for it though, so I think that comes out in November as well. No, it doesn't. That's such a lie. We are literally in December. What's wrong with my brain? I think it comes out in January or February, and I'm really excited for that, but I'm also apprehensive, like as always with these books, because of how successful Fourth Wing was. It was natural we were going to have like a bit of a dip, but we had a real like plummet with Iron Flame in terms of like other people's thoughts and ratings and things like that. So I just don't know where it's going to go from here, but hopefully on the up. Next book I read was If We're Villains by Emma Rio. This is another book that I'm not going to talk about too much because I did a reading vlog about this one. I just posted it. It's my most recent vlog. This came the closest to a 5-star I had this month. I just absolutely loved every single second of it. So this follows this boy called Oliver. We start the book and he's just been in prison. He's been there for 10 years and he's been there because he's accused of the murder of his classmate Richard. So Oliver and Richard and the rest of the group of the people we follow go to this arts college where people can study a bunch of different things, but these particular characters are in a Shakespeare course, so they're all thespians, they all live and breathe Shakespeare, and they're constantly putting on plays, and their school year kind of revolves around the plays throughout the year. And these characters are frequently cast in the same roles of the plays because of who they are and their way of portraying the characters. However, that does mean that the characters they're playing start to bleed into who they actually are, and things just kind of spiral out of control in a way that as a reader you can't really wrap your head around, but you just go along with it for the ride. So this book is like part dark academia, like ode to Shakespeare, and then part mystery thriller kind of book, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. So I read The Secret History a couple of years ago and I really liked that one. I gave it 4 stars, but it never gripped me in the way that If We Were Villains did. This one gripped me in a way that a thriller grips me. The Secret History I loved for the class discussions of classics. That one's about a classics cohort instead of a Shakespeare cohort. The point that lost me with The Secret History was about 50% through when we switched from the like love of classics to a straight up just like police investigation. This book did not lose me at the police investigation part because that's not really what we're following. The police officer does show up here and there throughout the book, obviously, because he's interviewing the students, but it's much more about the student dynamics and how they are kind of relating to each other but also coping with the events that happen. I mean, I don't want to get into detail because I will spoil things. I always wanted to pick this up. I missed it when I wasn't reading it. I did, however, think that the mystery part was really predictable, and that is what knocked this down from a 5-star to a 4.5-star rating. But I also couldn't ignore how much I just adored this book. It definitely gave me 5-star feels, and that's the reason why this has not gone any lower than a 4.5. I really liked the characters and how distinct each of them were, though I felt like we didn't get a lot about Richard. The kind of arc of his character was a little bit kind of like unexpected, and I feel like that was just because of the fact that we didn't know anything about him at all to begin with. Maybe that is because he's just consumed by the characters that he plays. We kind of discover more of Richard through what he's playing and less through who he actually is, because we lose him so early on in the story. This was obviously like not as well written as The Secret History. The Secret History is a modern classic. It kind of defined a genre, but I feel like this was surprisingly more different from that book than I thought it might have been. I thought it could have been just like a copy paste. Like on paper it seems really similar. The actual way it's told is very, very different. I have a lot to say on this final book, but I also need to be catching a train in like 40 minutes, so I'm gonna limit how much I can go on about it. But this was Orbital by Samantha Harvey, which is the Booker Prize winner for 2024. This is a sci-fi book. We're following these characters who are on a spaceship, following them over a very short period of time, and it's about just basically their life up in space. There's no major plot, we're just up in these characters' heads. It's about what they're thinking about, but also about what they're seeing, the daily routines of working on a spaceship and being an astronaut. Someone made the comment that this would have been infinitely better had it been a non-fiction read, creative non-fiction. So like still in this like very lyrical, interesting, speculative look at astronauts' life, but still having come from first-hand experience. The author, while she is very knowledgeable in these things, is also completely removed from that world in terms of the fact that she's never ever been to space. I feel like I had a general disconnect from this book. I feel like it might have been the writing style, the fact it was so short, the way it's written is very kind of blunt. The author speaks as this kind of like omnipotent being who can go within the minds of every single character, but also is looking at things in a wider way contextually. And I feel like that is maybe where the problem lies, because she would just make blanket statements. They'd be her opinion on something, but she'd say it as though it was fact. And because you're reading a sci-fi book and it's very heavily based in science, when the statement is just like, this is how it is, then you as the reader are going to be like, oh, this is how it is, you know, like you're going to take it as fact. But actually I feel like it was more speculative, like kind of philosophical. One particular point that really threw me off was that she said that it was an old way of thinking that the earth is special. And I wrote down in my notes here, the earth can be surrounded by millions and billions of other things, but it can still be special. So she tried to justify that like we've discovered that yes, the earth is like the center of our solar system, but it's not the center of our solar system. The rest of everything doesn't revolve around the earth is just one planet among billions and millions and trillions and gazillions of other planets and stars and everything else there is up in space. For example, I looked up this stat and it said that 2.38 billion people on the earth would call themselves Christian. And as Christians, you believe that the earth has so much value, it's so special. It's particularly so special to us. Yes, it's not like this profound thing to, you know, the other random moons in other universes, but for us, it is everything. And it is unique in the way that it was created and it was given to us. As Christians, you believe that the earth is a beautiful gift from God, that we've been honored with the task of caring for and protecting. And that's not to say all the other people on this planet who believe in the earth being something that was deliberate and intentional. The Muslims, the Jews, the Sikhs, the Hindus, everyone who believes that the earth was put here. Whenever I see some unbelievably beautiful part of the earth, whether it's the moon or a sunset or the ocean or mountains, I'm left in awe of how obviously God-given it is. And I'm sure that I look at the earth through the spirit, but I also think that it's said in the book that these people, while they're up in space, they look at the earth, while they're entirely captivated by it and amazed by it, they can't ignore the fact that its importance has been disproven. Yes, it is disproven in its scientific significance within the solar system, within the entire everything, you know, all the galaxies. Other than the moon, nothing pivots around the earth. But that fact does not disprove the idea that so many people hold that the earth was placed here and therefore is special to us. Apologies if the angle's slightly changed. The camera's memory card just got full. Can't even speak. Yeah, I wrote in my notes that is actually really interesting because later on there's a quote that says that the Christian man in the spaceship looks at the earth and is like, how could you not believe in God? Whereas the others just look at the earth and are like, how can you believe in God? There were these themes that were discussed, which I think are interesting and valid, but I just feel like I didn't like the way that the author was like the voice interceding these differing views, as though she knew what was actually fact, when obviously she's writing from opinion because she's as human as the rest of us. You know, I just feel like it was one singular viewpoint that was given, but the narrator is speaking as the other. She spoke like a nature documentarist. And I feel like if you're going to do that, what you're saying should be either factual or you should be very, very open-minded in what you're saying, basically making it clear that it is an opinion. Whereas it read like, some people think this, some people think this, but this is how it actually is. I don't think she could remain neutral in these very large concepts and ideas, philosophical thought. And I feel like that was the part that kind of irritated me, but particularly irritated me about this book, aside from just my general gripes with the technicalities of the writing style. I wrote an example here that David Attenborough is a self-proclaimed atheist, but his points are all based on scientific fact, or when there is speculation, he's very clear about it being speculation and he's not interfering with anyone's personal beliefs, and he's certainly not making any statements overruling them. Unless you are a flat earther, then he might have something to say about that. But yeah, that was my complex thoughts on Orbital. It was a really frustrating read, but also there was a lot of beauty in it it. There were a lot of one-liners that I found really, really interesting and caused me to think, which is the main thing I look for when I'm reading kind of like a literary style read. But overall I just was like kind of torn with it, dissatisfied with it. There were some elements within the writing that were really beautiful, so I gave that one 3 stars overall. But yeah, those are all the books that I read in November. I feel like this was the longest video in the entire world, but there were a lot of books to mention and I had a lot of opinions as always. If you disagree with anything I say, feel free to pop off in the comments down below. I'd love to have a respectful, interesting discussion with some of you. If you feel like you have different opinions or you agree with what I say, anything like that, I'd love to have a little chat. A lot of these I was like either one way or the other, and frequently I feel like people are not on this app, like people are not very honest about their opinions, and I really want that to be a key part of my channel, that like, yes, I might potentially be hurting some people's feelings, but I want to be open with how I feel about something and not base that on other people's ratings and reviews or what I feel like is safe for me to say. But yeah, I need to go catch my train. I'm really, really hitting it close. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you so much for being here. Subscribe if you'd like to stick around and see more videos from me, and I'll see you super duper soon in a couple of days for another video. I also can't believe my voice has made it this far because I'm still unwell. But yeah, I'm gonna go. I need to run. Bye bye.